You're watching a replay of Brain Drain with Rich Cabaceres. For more videos just like this, hit that red subscribe button.
And good morning. You're listening to Brain Drain on the legendary 1480 WSAR. I am Rich Cabaceres, and we are coming to you in all new ways. WSAR.com, Spindle City Auto Glass Studio Cam, Facebook Live on the J&J Jewelers Facebook Live Cam. When you go to Brain Drain with Rich Cabaceres, you're coming to you on the 1480 AM airwaves, and we have a bunch of stuff that we need to talk about today when it comes to school shootings. And it's funny because yesterday we talked about extremism and how looking at school shootings could be looked at the same way as we look at extremism. And 3 hours later, 3 hours, we had this shooting in Parkland, Florida. And it makes you ask, why does this continue to happen? In 2018 alone, we've had 18 shootings. There's been 31 school days this year. And out of that 18 school shootings, what are we doing wrong? How can we get ahead of this problem? What are we doing to fix this? Because it's happening more now than it's ever happened before. And is it just simply doing away with guns? Is it arming people? Is it giving our kids access to better education? Is it stopping things like bullying? Because there's a couple of common things between every single person who's been a school shooter. It says, and I've done a lot of research on this actually over the past maybe 24 hours, but most of them are depressed and intelligent, and another characteristic is all are outcasts. And we talked about what causes extremism, and being an outcast is one of the largest indicators of somebody being an extremist. And I'd make the argument that school shootings or school shooters are extremists. Gang members are extremists. People who are using guns to push their own agenda, that would, in my opinion, be extremism. And we've seen that even locally, potential gang violence on the streets of Fall River, Massachusetts, with a gun. But I think that it's important to talk about what causes somebody being an outcast. What causes them to be a school shooter? What causes them to join a gang? It's because they feel like they're outcasts, they need something to gain power again, and they join gangs. They become school shooters. This is scary when you think about it, because what are we doing to fix this? How are we making sure that people do not become outcasts? And I want to play you a little video of yesterday's school shooting in Parkland, Florida. And I want to warn you ahead of time that this is graphic. So if you don't want to hear this, turn down your radio temporarily. But I think it's important that we talk about how graphic this is and how this really can change people's lives.
Oh my God!
That's somebody walking into a classroom and literally shooting up the classroom, and kids, you can see the video, and there are kids huddled down hoping that this person doesn't come in. And there are other videos of police coming in and trying to bring somebody who's been shot out of the building. So imagine these kids. They must be dealing with some serious post-traumatic stress disorder. They must be dealing with some serious shock right now, because we had a hero out of the bunch, a football coach, I think he was. He jumped in front of the bullets to save a bunch of kids, and unfortunately he's passed. It seems that he's passed away, but he saved a bunch of people by jumping in front of some bullets. But how do we prevent this thing from happening again? And I think when you look at the characteristics of somebody, and one of the characteristics is all feel like outcasts, how do we make people feel like they're part of society? And before we go to the break, I want to read you a post by somebody, and the post is called, "I came very, very close to committing a school shooting." So the person says, "I was picked on a lot in high school. I think it was because I tried so hard to be cool and everyone saw right through it. There were these 4 cowboy jock types that gave it to me the worst. After being publicly humiliated and beaten in front of a girl I liked as she laughed and cheered, I decided that none of it was worth it. I had no support at home, being an only child and having parents that worked constantly, and cutting and burning myself didn't make me feel better anymore. So I got my dad's handgun out of the gun safe. He uses the same combination for everything, the idiot, and brought it to school with me the next day. I can't adequately describe to you guys how ready I was to kill these 4. I had absolutely no fear or doubt in my mind. I wanted nothing more than to show everyone what happens when you push someone over the edge like they did. I had the gun tucked in my waistline. I was wearing this baggy pair of cargo shorts that I wore a couple of times a week that day. I remember walking towards the Cowboys table, so goddamn ready for it to be over, when the gun fell out of my waistline, down my left short leg, and made the loudest effing sound as it hit the cafeteria floor. I tried my best to grab the gun real quick, but people saw what it was and screamed, and one of the instructors tackled me to the ground. They eventually concluded that I had brought the gun to school to impress people with bad buttery and had an intention of using it. I was expelled and sent to live at a youth ranch in Idaho until I was 18. I did have the intention of using it, though. I was going to kill all of them. I'm 24 now, and I still think about it all the time. I have not recovered from high school. I'm still terrified of people in general and avoid having relationships because of what I fear I'm capable of. I'm not looking for pity. I know what I did was wrong. It just feels good to tell the story. So, and if you go online, you can see other stories like this. This is scary. But you're live on the legendary 1480 WSAR. Good morning.
Good morning.
How you doing today?
I'm doing all right.
So, what say you?
I'm just wondering, because we had our own shooting here.
That's right.
And you have these people that, they jump up and down for tougher gun laws or whatever. Well, what gun law would have prevented that guy from shooting somebody?
Now,
you know what I mean? Because he had an illegal gun.
Right. And
murder's already illegal.
And the thing is, if somebody has an illegal gun, the argument from the pro-gun folks would be that they, if everybody else had guns, if they thought that that person had a gun and it was a legal gun, they may less likely use their illegal gun because they're worried about dying.
That's possible. Yeah. I mean, that's definitely a possible situation.
And I'll be honest with you.
Honestly, if you're armed, I mean, you can at least return fire, right?
Right. And I'll be honest with you. I have a license to carry. And there's a reason I have a license to carry, because I believe that. I believe that, if you have a gun, it's less likely that somebody else is going to be able to impinge on what's yours. Or infringe on what's yours.
Before they had that building cleared yesterday, I was hearing people talk about the all-powerful gun lobby and how they, do things to make this happen and all this stuff to prevent laws from being passed and whatnot. Mm-hmm. So I checked and I looked up the top 10 lobbies, and all of them. The gun lobby doesn't even crack the top 15. I'm not exactly sure where they fall on the list because the list wasn't that long.
So it's funny because they're on both sides. They're making arguments on why this happened. So the anti-gun people are saying it's violent video games and movies, and it's guns. The pro-gun people are saying it's pharmaceutical drugs, and the fact that people don't.
I have no idea about that, but I do know pharmaceutical companies are definitely in the top 10.
But they're also
the lobbyists. The top companies are tech companies, pharmaceutical companies, and energy companies.
Right.
Those are the biggest lobbies in this country.
Right.
So the all-powerful gun lobby that you hear every time this happens, that's a myth. It doesn't exist. They actually don't spend very much money. I believe last year they spent like $3 million total, spread out throughout the country.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny because
that's a drop in the bucket.
So it's funny because they're both pointing. Obviously, the anti-gun people are saying it's because of guns. The pro-gun people are saying because the right people don't have guns. So
I'm saying because certain people you can't control. individual behavior. Sorry, you just can't do it.
Here's my overarching statement. I think it's because these people are outcasts, and we need to do more to make people feel like they're part of society. And I think that requires everybody. That requires you, that requires me, that requires everybody who's listening today, that requires everybody who's watching on Facebook Live and WSAR.com, that requires everybody to realize that we need to make people feel like we're part of society. And things like extremism, which school shootings are, and gang violence will go away, or it will reduce drastically.
Well, I kind of agree with you, but I mean, like you said, you can't really control individual behavior. And so you can reach out to people, and if they don't want to be, social, then they're not going to be social. It's that simple. But, I mean, would it made a difference in this case? I don't know.
Well,
did anybody try? I'm not sure.
Well, let's look at this particular case, and I'm going to hold you there because we have the lines lit up right now. But thank you so much for your call. Have a great day.
Yeah, you too.
But let's look at this particular case. This particular case, the person who was and he was an adult. He was 19 years old. The alleged shooter was expelled from the school. And you have to figure that this kid, if he's 19 years old, is probably having trouble actually succeeding in school if he's still in school at 19 years old. And then he was expelled close to the end of the year. So what was the cause of all that stuff? I'm sure that's going to come out. But he must have felt like an outcast. You're live on the legendary 1480 WSAR. What say you?
How you doing, Rich?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
Not too bad. It's a little sad that it's just another day and another school shooting, and this is the topic we're talking about today, and we'll probably be talking about it again, I would imagine, probably a couple more times this year, because that seems to be the trend.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because there's been 18 shootings in 31 school days, so we could talk about this 2 days from now.
Yeah, and that's sad. That particular number is a little inflated because it's not, it doesn't call into effect mass shootings. It's more just, almost like that thing you read online where so-and-so brought a gun to the school, and those are included in that number.
Yep.
So that number's a little inflated, but that doesn't mean it's, it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with that, because really there should be no guns in schools. I just want to throw down some real quick facts.
Sure.
I think it's a fact that if this young man didn't have access to a gun yesterday, that 17 people would be alive right now. I'm going to say that's a fact.
I think that's fair.
I'm also going to throw down as a fact that, actually this is a little bit not a fact but conjecture, but I'm going to take a guess and say this guy was bullied and ostracized, and that was probably the reason for this. And then the last thing I'm going to throw down as a fact, which is really sucks, is there is really nothing we can do about this. In terms of legislation, nothing's going to happen, nothing's going to change, nothing's going to move. If Newtown didn't do it with a Democrat-controlled House and a Democrat president, nothing is going to come of this. And that's really sad.
I agree.
The only thing that we can really do is anti-bullying campaigns, and that's the best we're going to get. And it shouldn't be the best we're going to get, but realistically, in real talk, that's all we've got.
And I think that it could be better. So I agree with you that I don't think that anything is going to happen. I think it's going to continue to get worse because politicians aren't really changing anything. And an anti-bullying campaign seems to be the only thing that's happening. I think a lot of it is we as Americans need to change our mindset. We like to point the finger at people and say they're not like us. And what that does is that causes outcasts. And outcasts end up becoming extremists, whether it's a school shooting, whether it's gang violence, whether it's flying into the World Trade Center. They become extremists. So we need to figure out how we can make people feel more accepted now more than they ever have. Because something is changing, and I think it's because of the readily available information that's at the tip of your fingers. Now it's easier for people to turn somebody into a school shooter. It's easier for somebody to be turned into a bomber. It's easier for somebody to turn to gang violence as a way out. Because all this information is right there.
Absolutely.
But, as always, you bring up some very good points. I want to thank you for that.
No problem. Rich, I just wanted to add one thing real quick is for anyone who calls in and say we should arm our teachers, your teachers already are on their last nerve just dealing with your kids as it is. So if you want to give them a gun, don't. They're already on their last nerve.
And it's funny because I don't know where I stand about arming teachers. I'll be honest with you. I don't know where I stand. I have a license to carry. I think the Second Amendment is a right, and I don't know where to stand on teachers being armed. Because if you teach them properly, then there's no problem with them being armed. Just like kids being armed. If you teach them properly, I'm of the opinion that there's no problem with them being armed. But that's the issue, is the education behind it. So I think you bring up a fair point, and it's a fair point whether I agree or disagree. I honestly don't know where I stand on it right now. And actually, I'm telling you right now, callers are going to have the ability to have an impact on my opinion. Thank you.
I think, thank you, Rich. I just think we should maybe not look at arming teachers, because they already have enough work just trying to, take care of your kids for a couple hours a day and teach them something. But resource officers, maybe I know there's a police presence or a security presence in a lot of schools, and I think that is an effective deterrent. And I do think those should be that's a solution that should be looked at as well to keep our kids safe.
Now,
Thanks, Rich.
Have a great day. And there's one thing also that I want to add to this. This school had a school resource officer, but I'm hearing rumors that this school resource officer didn't have an actual gun. So what's the purpose of a school resource officer at that point in time? You're listening? Somebody says, Rich, ban these AK-15 weapons. They're not... Oh, I'm sorry, they meant AR-15 weapons, by the way. They're not used for hunting, only killing children. Somebody else responded to that saying, you might want to do more research. Never heard of an AK-15. Is this two guns in one? And again, there was a person who meant AR-15 as opposed to AK-15. But I think that's a fair question. Should we be banning assault rifles? And would this have been prevented at that point in time if we do ban assault rifles? You're live on a legendary 1480 WSAR. What say you?
Good morning, sir. No, it wouldn't have been prevented because you can print a receiver for an assault rifle on a 3D printer nowadays, so that's out the window. And even worse, the government won't even know you have it because it's not a registered part. There's no origin of manufacture or anything like that. Why not arm teachers if they want to be armed? If you're a school teacher and you feel safer just like a regular citizen, right now it's actually prohibited from anyone entering a school other than an on-duty police officer or someone with the within law enforcement, specifically there to do a task. It's illegal. Why not arm teachers if they so choose to be armed? Have a special program, an educational program, make them qualify once a year like a police officer, and arm them and train them. Why not? One school resource officer in a school the size of Durfee, you think they're going to have an effect on, two guys going in there with guns of any sort?
Well,
you know what I mean?
It's funny because one of the things that I consistently said before we talk about school shootings was that one of the reasons why kids accidentally shoot themselves with guns is because they weren't properly trained how to use a firearm.
Right.
So,
I have two daughters who've both known how to shoot since they were 8 years old. They know how to, from the time they were 8 years old, they could walk into your home, and if you forgot and left your weapon on your dresser, and they were over there for a sleepover with your daughter, and, your daughter said, oh, look, my dad's gun. My daughter could pick that gun up, make it safe, and not have to be, no one would have to worry about it. That she was taught to do that. There was never any curiosity on my kid's part about firearms because I've always been into firearms. You know what I do for a living.
You got it.
They were brought up around it. They were allowed to view, touch, shoot, whatever, whenever they want. I would drop if my daughter said to me, Daddy, can I see the gun, this gun or whatever, I would drop everything I was doing. Here you go, hon. So there's no curiosity. They know it's a tool like any other tool. The problem today is I disagree with what you said. You say we need to make people feel more accepted. That's all well and good. But the fact of the matter is we have to make people who want marshmallows, because that's what we're turning out is just we're turning out people who don't know how to deal with rejection, don't know how to deal with failure, don't know how to deal with, remarks from somebody that aren't completely flattering. It's a sad state we're in, and that's not the way it was when I grew up. You made your way. You put your head down and you muscle through it. You're having a bad day, figure it out.
And it's funny because I agree to an extent. I don't mean that we should make people feel accepted by simply letting them do whatever they want to do, and then when something bad happens, they don't know how to get out of it. I mean, we need to figure out a way to make people feel included in the process while we all fail together. Does that make sense? And we are able to accept that when we fail, we can pick ourselves up and we don't have to be coddled in the process.
the problem that we have today is, and I'll bet everything I have on it. The problem we have today, the failure is in the home. Failure's not so much. It's not the teacher's job to raise your kid. It's your job. You make a baby, you're responsible. And unfortunately, we live in a society where a lot of kids to a lot of people are nothing more than an accessory for life. They really don't care.
And you know what? You're right. A lot of the problem happens at home. Now the question is, the question becomes
two or three. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
The question becomes, if we know that the problem is happening at home, how do we change it at home? Because we know that
we change it. We make it so that if you have a baby and you can't afford it, that you're told and it's understood that we'll help you with the first one, but if you continue to have, it's not your right to just breed as much as you want. It's your responsibility to take care of the children you create. So what we have is people that, hey, I want another kid. I talked to a guy this week who's here illegally who has 3 kids, and I know they get state assistance. Why not have more? I only had 2 because I figured, hey, this is all I can afford. I'd love to have a house full of kids, but I can't give them a good life. Therefore, I stopped, creating babies when I figured, hey, this is, the limit as to how many people I can sustain.
I think you bring up some very good points, and I want to hear what other people have to say about some of the points you made, because they're very controversial, but I understand where you're coming from. So
I've heard people say, oh, why can't I, why should I be limited on how many babies I can have just by the fact of how much money I make?
Thank you so much.
That's pretty common sense to me.
Thank you so much, because I think that what we're ultimately talking about, and have a great day. I think what we're ultimately talking about is how to prevent this from happening, and the statement that the caller just made was that it is happening because of what's happening at home. And people are just having kids, but they don't really care about their kids. But ultimately, at the end of the day, those kids, when it's happening right now, are going to the school system. They're becoming part of society, and we still have to figure out a way to help those folks or make sure that they don't hurt other people, even when they get into society. And other than kind of the personal experiences that I've had with that on my own, I'm going to leave that up to you. So you're live on the legendary 1480 WSAR. What say you?
Hey, good morning.
Good morning. How are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing okay. Hey, the difference, South Main Street is open. That school is not open yet.
Yeah. And that was, in my opinion, that's probably going to be related to gang violence at some point in time, because based on what the story that I read was, there was a couple of people looking for this person, apparently. So that might very well be gang violence.
Oh, probably. Hey, if you listen to the governor of Florida, he said there was evil. Evil. If a doctor asks a question about your mental stability in the state of Florida, the governor is finding the doctors.
Because they're asking about their mental stability in general?
If you have a weapon.
All right, so if they have a weapon. Okay, so they're impinging on their Second Amendment right is what the governor's saying.
I guess. He's cracking down on doctors for that cause, I guess. I don't know.
That's interesting.
If you're suicidal, there's a whole long thing of categories in there. And the other one is to get a handgun in the state of Florida, you got to be 21. And a long gun, you can be 18. So, I don't know what the answers are, but I feel for the parents, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's the one thing that we have to unanimously say is I feel for the parents and the loved ones of these folks, because there are kids who are dead today. There's 17 people in Florida, 15 injured. I think this. So
I guess we'll have to go after evil. If you are mentally unstable and you have a handgun and you're suicidal, you're fine.
Thank you so much for your call. Have a great day.
Take care.
You're live on the legendary 1480 WSAR. What say you?
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. How are you doing today?
Pretty good. The state of affairs is terrible.
Okay.
I feel bad even for the young man who is the shooter, because obviously he didn't get any help.
And
obviously this was something that was brewing. People knew about. He was unstable, and nobody could reach this person.
And he was actually expelled, which is interesting to me because he must have already felt like an outcast. And then they expelled him, which probably made him feel more like an outcast, and the only option that he felt he had to do was shoot people. Whether that's right or wrong of feeling that way, I think that we have to kind of look at his mind and what led him to be where he was now. And every other school shooting, what led them to be, and down to pretty much a person, they were outcasts.
That's what it came down to.
Which is scary.
And you got to, being a teenager today in the school system is not easy for a lot of people.
Well, because people have the ability to bully you outside of the schools now with social media. When I was growing up and when you were growing up, once you left school, the bullies went away. You could go home, and granted, you might have a new set of bullies, or those kids in your neighborhood might still hang out with you, and then you're getting bullied again, but the bullies went away when you left school. Now with social media, the bullying is 24/7.
Well, if you're online, that is. But this kid obviously seemed like he didn't have a friend in the world, and so sad that nobody could reach that kid before he committed this atrocity.
Yeah. Yeah, I think...
But there's a lot more of this. Probably going to be happening too, because it gets publicized and everybody hears about it, and there's some other kid out there who's also an outcast, who also doesn't have a friend in the world.
Yeah.
And they're going to try to get attention somehow.
So here's a question to you. How do you think we stop something like this? Do you think we cut guns out of school? Do you think we add more guns to school? Do you think we help these kids? Do you think we start cracking down on the parents? What do we do?
I think you got to try to help the kids. Help the kids to understand that you shouldn't be bullying other people and things of that nature. The guns don't kill the people; it's the people shooting that kills the people.
Right.
So, you don't want to end up like Venezuela, do we? Where they can't even get toilet paper and stuff.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your call.
Thank you for taking my call.
Have a great day.
Bye.
You're live in the legendary 1480 WSAR. What say you?
Hello, hi, Rich.
How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well.
That's good. In regards to the shooting and the gun issue and all that, first of all, my heart goes out to the families and obviously the kids that were killed. And as far as laws and, trying to stop some of this, I mean, I'm a gun owner, have been for over 30 years. And I'm responsible with them, and my kids, I have 3 children, they've been brought up around them. But as far as ever allowing any of my kids to use the guns at 8 years old, I think is ludicrous. First of all, it takes a certain amount of strength to use a slide to, work the slide on a gun, and even, depending on what the weapon is.
That's if it's not a revolver.
I think that's a little crazy with regardless what his occupation is. It's something I wouldn't do. I think it's too young. And I think Massachusetts is a good example of what other states should follow as far as magazine capacity and the laws here in Mass. The laws down south are too lenient. For this kid not to obtain a handgun, but yet he was able to obtain an assault rifle, which actually really isn't an assault rifle. It's a semi-automatic. It's not a fully automatic weapon with a .223 caliber. They use those to hunt coyotes, for example, the same caliber. But they need to tighten up the gun laws. We're not living in Ozzie and Harriet times, the Waltons times anymore. Times have changed, and I think they need to tighten up the gun laws. And I think whenever your license is renewed, you should have a psychological exam, just like officers do. I think that's important. Things have to be put in place now. This is getting way too crazy with all these gun shootings.
Well, thank you for your opinions, and I hate to cut you short, but we do have to go to a break. So thank you so much for your opinions, and we'll talk about them more so on the other side of the break. Have a great day.
You too.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So before we go to break, I want you to really think about this. Do you think that this was caused by guns? Do you think that this was caused by society? Do you think that this was caused by, within the society, the upbringing? Or do you think this was caused by the culture in the school system? Those are very, very important questions. You're live on the legendary 1480 WSAR. What say you?
Hi, Rich. I definitely agree with the gentleman that called and said that, it starts in the family. I believe that the discipline that you show to your children is going to, dictate how they live their lives. You see mothers today, they just put their kids in front of a TV and they're constantly consuming violence, and they don't have any breaks on what they're allowed to watch. And I really think that's getting played out in society.
And I think that you're bringing up some concerns that a lot of people share. The violence that they see on TV, the violence that they see in video games, and the lack of parenting in the household. But we are getting close to the end of the first hour where we're going into the news. So I want to let you make a final point, and then we're going to allow everybody else to kind of jump in too. So what say you, your final point?
Well, my dad's been known to say when ADD was really prevalent, they were medicating all these kids. It's nothing a good bullet in the ass ain't going to cure. Spend time with your kids and watch what they're watching. Don't just let them, a TV be the babysitter.
So,
be involved.
And I think that's a fair point. Spend time with your kids. That is probably the best point that I've heard so far today. Spend time with your kids. Thank you so much for your call. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too.
You're live on the legendary 1480 WSAR. Good morning. Good morning. How you doing? I'm talking to you. I can hear myself in the background. You're live on legendary 1480 WSAR. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning. I just want to say something real quick.
Sure.
To the gentleman that called that said he has two daughters who know how to flip around with firearms, I want to give that man massive props and credit. I really question somebody who says they're a gun owner in Massachusetts and says that the laws in Massachusetts are good. You know what I'm saying? Another caller dogged the previous caller.
Yep.
But the man that said that he taught his daughters how to run through firearms, I give mad props to him. The world needs more fathers like him.
And it's funny that you say that, and thank you so much for your call. It's funny that you say that because I think one of the reasons why people are so afraid of guns is because they don't know how to utilize them. And teaching them maybe at a younger age is a good thing in my opinion. Whether it's 8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old, 15 years old, whatever that age may be, the concern is these kids may have access to your gun. You're live on the legendary 1480 WSAR. What say you?
Oh, I was talking about the school and kids getting guns. I just want to go back to your last caller that had spoke about spending time with your kids. And, thinking about high school and things like that, I think we need to get these kids somehow, some way involved with activities that go on in school, because I always felt that information changes situations. So if we can build a relationship with the young people with these after-school programs and sports, and that doesn't have to be sports. It could be anything, theater, music, whatever they're involved in. And I think reaching to them and spending time with them and keeping them in school longer, I don't think it's going to relieve the problem or stop the problem, but it might help within our community. And other communities that deal with it in their own way. But within our community, what happened on South Main Street, I think we need to spend more time with the young people and getting them involved in after-school activities and other activities so we can reach. I used to do boxing, and I worked with a lot of at-risk youth, as we call them, and I got to build a relationship with a lot of them that may have dropping out of high school. And through boxing, I got them to go back to school and get their GED, and most of them are working now and productive citizens in society, where when I first met them, they didn't have any direction or any route like I hadn't had growing up, So I got life later in life. In my late 30s is when I kind of caught on to life. So I think that might be maybe a little bit of something we can do. Not to say it's going to cure it all. Does that make any sense?
No, it makes a ton of sense. And I think the thing that, and I've been talking about this for a while, if we did things like extend the learning day so that way kids can learn ethics and morals and things like that as opposed to science, science, technology, engineering, or English and math. But other than losing those four things, I think that we would have a better quality of child who's growing up today as well. But the issue is money. It's always money. We're not willing to invest in our children's education, but we're willing to invest in things that we don't necessarily need. But to that point, they would have access to those things as part of the school curriculum.
And I understand that. And extending the day for school things, I think a lot of the activities are good because it gives a teacher or someone in the school a chance to build a relationship with them.
If you let me interrupt you real quick, you have 15 seconds left, and then we got to go to the news break, so go for it.
Well, that's the thing, and it's just getting to know the kids and working with them and building a relationship. A lot of these kids today in the cities don't really care what college you graduated from. Is once they realize you care, and you looking for the best interest in them, and that's when you're going to get the best out of them. So I think extending the day for school, maybe not, but extending the day for activities is kind of a key and maybe a little bit of a fix. But thanks for your time. I enjoy your show.
Hey, thank you so much, and I think you make some really, 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 really good points because we are talking about school shootings. We're talking about the most recent school shooting in Parkland, Florida. We're talking about what leads to extremism. And we talked about this yesterday. We talked about how it leads to extremism isn't just flying planes into buildings and blowing people up and things up and using yourself as a suicide bomber, but it's also gang violence, the KKK. It's also school shootings. These folks became extremists. And one of the main reasons why that happened is because they were outcasts. Why is this happening? Why are we not working on fixing this issue? And we're going to go right to the line. You're live on the legendary 1480 WSAR. Thanks for staying on the line. What say you?
Hi. I know people are going to say, oh, she's crazy, but I feel as though we're in a secular society. People are afraid to mention the word of God. They should bring the prayer back to school.
You know, and I understand why you feel the way that you feel, but honestly, in my opinion, I think that it's okay to believe in a God. I think it's your right to believe in a God. I think that ultimately what should happen is we should teach kids morals and ethics which come directly from religion. And that is monotheistic religions and even other religions that aren't monotheistic create a lot of the ethics and morals today are created from those religions. So if we teach kids ethics and morals, we could do it in a way that isn't talking about God, but still teach kids how to get by day to day and treat their fellow humans. What say you?
I agree with that. Now, when I was growing up, a lot of times we think of doing something, and then we had that fear of God. You know, it was fear. Now it's all love, love, love. Love is fine, but we had a little fear of something, or fear of our parents, you know, being disciplined and all. Today, the children, they're not afraid about anything.
Well,
they're not afraid of a thing. They'll call the police on their parents.
You know, and I think you bring up a good point about children who are willing to call police on their parents. But at the end of the day, there are some children who maybe need to call the police on their parents too, because maybe what they're experiencing is something like sexual assault or even worse. So they might need to call the police. So I think that there's an extreme on both sides of the negatives of children who have the ability to call the police on their parents. There's an extreme that, you know, maybe they're calling on just simple discipline, but there's also, if we don't allow them to do that, then there's the extreme that something serious may be going on.
Well, I understand what you're saying, but I'm talking about we've turned into be such a secular society.
I understand.
And it's so wrong. It is wrong, wrong, wrong.
Thank you so much for your call.
Okay,
Have a great day.
Bye.
You're live on the legendary 1480 WSAR. What say you?
Good morning.
Morning. How you doing today?
Good. You?
I'm doing great.
You know, I keep bringing this up, but it falls on deaf ears. Charlotte Iserby's The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America, and the other book she's got, the Back to Basics. These books describe that these children and teachers are being retrained to be forced to teach children to educate a one-world government and to get rid of the American way of life. And, you know, the pressures of that being taught to children and to our teachers, and the drugs that they've been prescribed, the combination of all of these things, and I'm not just making this up. This is all documented if anybody will research this. You know, these people are being forced to retrain our children in a different way to a globalization. I mean, these are the terms they use: globalization, sustainability. And you start looking into these words and their definitions on what they mean on a global scale. Our school systems are retraining our children for a one-world government, and nobody is even paying attention. And then you're forcing this on these kids, and they're used to one way. Their parents are telling them one thing, and the schools are telling them another. And they're even, the education system is telling these children, don't pay attention what your parents say because they really don't know what's going on.
So a couple of things. First, I want to let you know that you're not falling on deaf ears because we talk about the deliberate dumbing down of America book on.
Let me ask you
Hold on 1 second. I just want to finish my points. So we're not. It's not falling on deaf ears because I've heard, every time we call in, we talk about education. You bring up this point, and I think it's a fair point that you're bringing up. That being said, I also think that pharmaceuticals could potentially be part of the cause of what's happening because as opposed to kind of teaching our kids and stuff like that, we simply give them a pill and hope that they get better. And that's potentially part of the problem. But
do you know how the psychiatrists determine the diseases that mental disorders?
Tell me.
You don't know?
Well, obviously you're asking a question that's a statistic that could be manipulated.
Test. They vote on it.
All right.
It's a vote.
So again,
there's no blood test, no urine test, no hair analysis test, nothing. They just stand in a big giant room and vote on what to call this particular disease, like ADD or ADHD.
But giving something a name.
Tests. They just vote on it.
Giving something a name is different than giving something somebody a diagnosis. That's two different things. So to make the statement that people are standing in a room and voting on what to call something is a lot different than people standing in a room and diagnosing one person. That doesn't happen. An individual psychiatrist or a doctor diagnoses people with what they have. So there's a big difference there, and I want to point that out.
Yeah, but this is according to them, not me.
And again, you're talking about them naming an illness as opposed to diagnosing somebody with an illness. A name is irrelevant. I could call it the J&J Jewelers disease, and it's irrelevant at that point in time, right? Ultimately, what it's about is what is the diagnosis? What are the symptoms that person is displaying in order to cause this disease to happen?
How did they determine that? They don't give you any blood tests. They don't take analysis for hair analysis, urine tests. Nothing.
Because the mind is a fickle thing, and people are still trying to wrap their head around the mind since Freud. So people, and before that it was philosophy, right? You had guys like Nietzsche, and you had guys who, like Socrates, who were talking about the mind and how they thought that it worked. The mind is a funny thing, and it continues to evolve. So I appreciate what you're saying about them naming things, but ultimately naming things and talking about the symptoms and what actually is the ultimate cause of an illness is two different things. And with that, I'll let you make your final point, and then we got to go to a break, so go for it.
Well, like Aristotle said, educated men are as educated as the living are to the dead.
Thank you so much for your call. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Massachusetts. You're live on the legendary 1480 WSAR. What say you?
Hey, Rich. Welcome to the New World Order is what I say.
Okay.
The reason I say that is our children are being culturally indoctrinated. Okay? They're being fed fluoride, Prozac, Ritalin. They're being trained to commit suicide and mass murders. They're being exposed to violence through video games, through television, through music. I mean, what do we expect our children to act like?
You know, and I've heard the pharmaceutical argument before. I've heard the violent video game argument before, and I've heard the fluoride argument before, and those are all really good questions. And is this leading to the increased amount of shootings that are happening now more than ever? Why didn't this happen 60 years ago?
Cultural indoctrination is what it is.
Okay.
Think about that word for a second.
I'm thinking about it. I know exactly what you mean the second that you say it.
Okay, so my point is our children are being trained to behave this way, and it's all part of the New World Order, Rich, is what it is.
Well, thank you so much for your call.
Have a good day.
And we'll see what other people think. Have a great day. You're live on legendary 1480 WSAR. What say you?
Yeah, I tend to agree somewhat with that previous caller, but there's always been liquor on the shelves, drugs in the streets, and guns in the home.
Yep.
Now, if you've got a bad child, and you know you do, you don't need a psychiatrist to tell you, a bad apple child. because you try to cover it, you don't talk about it, but when you have a child that has some serious problems. And the thing is that what parent wants to take their teenage child to a psychiatrist?
I think that's a fair question. What parent wants to go to a psychologist to see if their child is okay? And that's something that's happening more and more, and they're using that as a mechanism to be able to learn how to deal with their kids because they don't understand where they're coming from.
Nobody can vet that sick person better than the parent. And you feed them dinner, you clothe them, you see them off to school, you watch them grow, and they said, I've got a bad child. I've got to be careful with this kid.
And, maybe it's not the bad child. Maybe it's society. Sure, you could grow up, or you could be born with DNA that tells you that you're going to be dealing with mental disorders and things like that. But a lot of times when you deal with these school shootings, it's society. It's, again, because pretty much down to a person when it comes to school shootings, when it comes to extremism, when it comes to gang violence, there felt like there were outcasts, and there's the rare situation where they're psychopaths or they're sociopaths, and they weren't an outcast. They were literally just looking to create havoc.
I agree with you. I think that you're right on. As a matter of fact, I'm just amazed at how many people leave their guns open for the children to get a hold of them. I mean, this kid was off his rocker, but he had access to weapons. And that's a shame. And that's a shame if you've got a bad apple child and you just leave your weapons unlocked and stuff. Now, are you trying to tell me that he didn't premeditate this?
Well, I think that's one of the big arguments is this person should have been flagged a long time ago because they were talking about doing something like this in the past. And then I think the expulsion of this particular person was kind of the last straw. It was the straw that broke the camel's back.
Yeah, and look what happened. And like I think it was the sheriff said, you really can't stop this kind of, when somebody's sick like that with a commitment to do harm, you try to prevent the carnage, but you can't stop the carnage.
Well, you can you can by simply preventing the person from being sick because they feel like an outcast, and that's the question.
Come in.
Well, not just the parents. I think part of it is society, not the society that they're experiencing at home, but also the society they're experiencing at school. How do we prevent things like bullying? How do we make kids feel more accepted, but still teach them that they're going to fail in life and they have to learn how to deal with failure? So
it's easy to say that if you don't feel safe in school, then you're not living in America. Very easy to make that comment. I've heard intelligent people make that comment. And the thing is that the truth of it all is it's up to us individually to really take a good look at who our neighbors are and the children in the neighborhood and stuff. And I think the teachers have got to open an eye to these behaviors and take them seriously. I don't think these kind of things can be stopped. But like I agree with you that through prevention. And what's the old saying about prevention and cure? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Well, how do we know right now that we've prevented many of these incidents from happening because there has been good prevention?
Well, we don't know how many we've actually prevented, and I don't think we'll ever know because some people don't say it. And I actually read an article that somebody wrote about how they almost did exactly that, but the gun fell out of their pants. But I want to thank you so much for your call. Yeah, and I'll read that again before the end of the show. Thank you so much for your call. Have a great day. And a couple of people on Facebook Live and the J&J Jewelers Facebook Live cam said, somebody said, gun owners should be subject to periodic random wellness checks. Somebody else said, see something, say something. Too many of these things have red flags that people ignore. You're live in the legendary 1480 WSAR. What say you?
Morning, Rich. I think one of the biggest breakdowns with the at-risk youth and the youth that are troubled is not only the breakdown in society, but also the breakdown in the home. Now, look at all the children that you have in DSS custody. Whether it's because they lost parents, or whether it's because their parents are addicted, or whether it's because their parents are not fit to care for them. When they go into a situation like that, when they feel neglected, when they feel that no one loves them, what do? They go to the streets, they build up anger, resentment, and they take the anger out on other people. You need to have a more solid home for these kids. They need to have parents or guardians that love them. You need to take an interest in their lives. You need to take an interest in what they're doing, what they're watching, who they're associating with.
But how do you do that? And I agree with you, but how do you do that? How do you incentivize parents or get them to start loving their children again?
That's the difficulty. That's the breakdown in society when we have so many people addicted to drugs, when we have so many people. I'm telling you, parents, not all parents, but a lot of parents put their interests first before the interests of their children.
And, that's been happening forever, though. So, it's funny because I'm rewatching the series Borgias, and it was the Pope, the Borgia who became the Pope, and how his son was part of the process and in the church, and it was him putting his interest before his child, who was a Pope. So this has happened since the beginning of time, where parents are putting their interest before the child. The difference is children are treating it a different way than they used to.
You're right, but also in the home, they're not taught respect, they're not taught kindness, they're not taught the morality, taught the right and wrong. You have all these kids that spend so much time on Facebook, so much time on video games. And, yeah, you could say, okay, it's not the video games, it's not the Facebook, but they're spending all their time on these outside areas, and they're not getting the attention, and they're not getting these kids that are bullying. Are they going home to a house where they're bullied? Are they going home to a house where they're neglected? They're not being taught to respect each other.
Well, let's put this to the test real quick, this theory. Because when I was a kid, when I was 10, 11 years old, I used to go out until the streetlights came on, right? And how many kids are allowed to do that today? A lot of kids aren't allowed to go outside unless there's some supervision because parents are afraid of kidnapping. So,
you're right.
So because we're coddling people and we're not exposing them to the actual world, they have no other option than to find the world themselves, and that is through the internet.
You're right, and when I grew up, and I've lived in Fall River most of my life. When I grew up on Tecumseh Street. I lived on Snell Street, two of the worst areas in the city. Today they are.
Okay.
But when I lived on Tecumseh Street and when I lived on Snell Street, I was young. But when the street lights came on, I had to go in my house. I could not go out. That was my signal. My parents would call me in when the street lights went on.
Yeah,
And today, kids
you'd push it sometimes, right? You'd push it and you'd say, all right, what happens? And that gives you the opportunity to learn what right and wrong is, even something stupid like the streetlights. But it gave you the opportunity to socialize with people outside of school and a different group of people at that. So you had to learn how you had to act in different situations, and now that's not necessarily happening. The other thing that happens is, as opposed to before, you may have had a group of friends outside of school and you may have been bullied in school. Now bullying is 24 hours a day because of social media.
You're right. And if it's on social media, where are these kids getting on social media? Well, obviously in the home.
So the question becomes, and I thank you so much for your call, and I really, really appreciate it. Have a great day. The question I think becomes, is it greater to give children the access to experience the world on the computer, or do we want to not expose them to that access because we're worried about limiting their exposure to the world? And I'd argue that is potentially the same argument as not allowing kids to go play outside because we're worried about them being kidnapped. And, I'm not a parent. I don't have children. So this is me speaking as somebody who doesn't have children, but I'd make that argument. And if you disagree, if you agree, if you think that this is something that leads to things like school shooting and extremism, call in 508-673-1480. Join the conversation. All right, and I'm going to read this article called "I Came Very, Very Close to committing a school shooting." And I think it's important to understand from somebody who's actually thinking about doing exactly this and almost did it. All right, this person says, "I was picked on a lot in high school. I think it was because I tried so hard to be cool and everyone saw right through it. There were these 4 cowboy jock types and gave it to me the worst. After being publicly humiliated and beaten in front of a girl I liked as she laughed and cheered, I decided that none of it was worth it anymore. I had no support at home, being an only child, and having parents that worked constantly and cutting and burning myself didn't make me feel better anymore, so I got my dad's gun out of the gun safe. He uses the same combination for everything, the idiot, and brought it to school with me the next day. I can't adequately describe to you guys how ready I was to kill these four. I had absolutely no fear or doubt in my mind. I wanted nothing more than to show everyone what happens when you push someone over the edge like they did. I had the gun. I tucked it in my waistline. I was wearing the baggy pair of cargo shorts that I wore a couple times a week that day. I remembered walking towards the Cowboys table, so goddamn ready for it to be over, when the gun fell out of my waistline, down my left short leg, and made the loudest effing sound as it hit the cafeteria floor. I tried my best to grab the gun real quick, but people saw what it was and screamed, and one of the instructors tackled me to the ground. They eventually concluded that I had brought the gun to school to impress people with bad buttery, and had no intention of using it. I was expelled and sent to live at a youth ranch in Idaho until I was 18. I did have the intention of using it, though. I was going to kill all of them. I'm 24 now, and I still think about it all the time. I have not recovered from high school. I'm still terrified of people in general, and avoid having relationships because of what I fear I'm capable of. I'm not looking for pity. I know what I did was wrong. It just feels good to tell the story. You're live on the legendary 1480 WSAR. What say you?
How's it going? That previous caller kind of made a couple of points. What I find interesting the last 24 hours, Rich, is how it's all being pushed toward them, and other factors are being ignored. I like to know when the entertainment industry is finally going to bear some responsibility in this, and I'll explain why. Pop culture nowadays, Rich, has more influence on a child than the parents.
Okay.
Right? The NRA did not create the game Grand Theft Auto. It doesn't write gangster rap. Those are outside influences have more of an effect on a child or a teenager than a gun. A gun is an inanimate object. If you want to put laws in restricting certain weapons, that's fine. But if that kid didn't have a gun yesterday, he would have sat in a car in a parking lot, waited for the kids to get out of school, and most kids, when they come out of school, they're in groups, and ran those kids over.
So let me kind of point out something real quick, and I know you're passionate about this, but I want to point out an example that I know for a fact. My friends and I listened to gangster rap growing up. I was listening to gangster rap at 8 years old. I played Grand Theft Auto at a very, very young age, probably before I was actually a teenager. So maybe Grand Theft Auto came out slightly after, but I can remember playing the old one where it wasn't as violent. Now, that being said, I became, I think, an okay citizen, and majority of people who play those things become an okay citizen. If anything, people realize instantly that it is fantasy, and it is nothing more than playing a video game. So I get where you're going with this argument, but I don't necessarily agree.
Well, here's the thing. Let's take a different person in a different environment. Take a kid in a poorer environment where the parents are actually less involved in the kid's life.
I grew up on welfare, and I lived on my own at 17 years old.
Okay, now let's put you in Detroit or Chicago or inner city where a lot of those things, where those kids are poor, but it's different for them because the education system is a complete failure in some of these inner cities.
When I was in middle school, kids around me were actively being recruited for gangs.
Rich, I'll make it easy for you.
Yep.
I'll give you an example of what banning guns does and how it doesn't really affect anything. England, okay? England. Guns are banned there, right? Most citizens can't obtain them.
That's right.
In the past 5 years, violence has increased by 13% of all kinds. Stabbings, home invasions, acid attacks, all have gone up in the past years. The problem in general, Rich, is violence. It's not just the gun, it's violence in general. It's all kinds of violence. But what the problem is here is we simply focus on one aspect of violence in terms of school shootings. This kid, like I said, if he didn't have a gun, he would have done it. This kid was addicted to violence.
I think it's a fair argument. I think that's a very fair argument. I think you're right. He was addicted to violence.
What led this kid to become addicted to violence? That's the thing nobody's willing to answer and nobody's willing to look at. All the anger and the passion is towards the gun. The gun doesn't think. The gun doesn't act. Listen, I grew up at a time, Rich, where most kids had hunting rifles. They had BB guns. They were taught responsibility. What changed in the past 20 years?
And, I think you're bringing up a very, very good point when you bring that up. This kid, it wasn't the gun who caused the issue. It was the kid. It was the 19-year-old, actually he was an adult, who decided to walk into that school. And I'd argue, and I think we're making the same point, it's society. You believe that it's a lot of the outside factors that people are experiencing by looking at it and thinking that they should reflect that. And I do agree with you that pop culture is perpetrated and kids look at role models or who they perceive as role models more so than their own parents even. But I think that you're right. But I think that it ultimately comes down to what they're experiencing even in their household. And something like bullying is being perpetuated by parents even in the household because they're going online and they're criticizing people like Donald Trump about things like his hair. They're going online and persecuting people like Bernie Sanders about his age. So you have these people who are going and literally bullying people that they don't see, and then kids are doing that same exact act in school.
Well, you know what's interesting about bullying, other aspects of violence, Rich? If you notice, when those things happen, the blame gets pushed towards they instantly go towards the individual. When it comes to gun violence, it seems to me the media and certain people, groups, they always gravitate towards the gun, not the individual. And that's the real problem. Everything is tied to the person himself, whether it's a gun violence, whether it's bullying, whether it's domestic violence, whether it's even rape. And anger towards women. It's all related to the individual.
So how about this?
We're able to,
how about this? I think that you're right. I think you're 100% right that that's what happens. But I don't blame either of them. I blame society. Society somewhere along the way molded this person to be this way, unless there is some genetic disorder. But society, majority of the times, is the reason why people feel like an outcast.
Yeah, like I said, though, I think if this kid was mentally ill, I think we can point to that. That's going to be an issue. But I also think that there are so many kids in this country these days who aren't mentally ill, who are somehow, like I said, they are addicted to violence because they see it every day, whether it's in TV, whether it's movies and video games and music. And until we deal with those issues, it may not be a school shooting. It may be an inner city shooting in Chicago and Baltimore and Detroit, where these things are going on every day. I mean, there are probably 10, 15 people killed in Chicago last night. I don't see anybody talking about that.
And, I think you bring up some very, very good points. And I appreciate it because you were making some good points, and we agreed on some, and we disagreed on others. This is exactly what having this conversation is all about. And this is how we actually get things to be solved, as opposed to just standing firm where we belong, understanding what each other are saying, and trying to meet in the middle somewhere and come up with a conclusion, as opposed to just arguing about it. Thank you so much for your points. Have a great day. You're live on the legendary 1480 WSAR. What say you?
How you doing, Capaceris? What's going on, brother?
Not much. How are you doing today?
Good. Yeah, definitely something's going on. If you go into the readings of Aleister Crowley, like I brought up before, he would preach this love, this love, utopian. You got to get in the mind of these psychopaths, Rich. Basically, he could go on to saying, you know what, I sent them to a better place because I love them. And that's what's getting switched. This is that knowledge I was talking about. We have to think of how these psychopaths are thinking. I grew up from a rough background, Rich. I was bullied. I had to grab bats, chase people out the project so they didn't, mess with me. You know what I mean? I didn't turn out that bad, at least I think. So I think you got to go on this moral road and this spiritual journey on your own through pain, through suffering. Basically, like one of your callers had brought up earlier, sometimes you don't mature until your 30s, late 30s, early to mid-30s before you start realizing, certain things and how to approach life. And you maybe, have your own morality. Maybe we did drop the ball, Rich, raising some of these kids. Maybe we raised them too sensitive. Maybe they need to get acquainted with nature. They feel that power, from firing that firearm. It could be a mental disease. We're not talking about the kid that got shot locally at the bus stop either. I mean, this is a systematic. This keeps happening in society. We have to address this. Something's going on, whether it's some kind of spiritual stuff, because or conspiracy theory, or just people are not taught and educated the right way, Rich.
I thank you so much for your points because, again, you're making some very good points. I really, really appreciate it. And I think you're right. I think one of the things that we don't ask enough is, what can I do to make this never happen again? What can I do to change the society around me? What can I do to be an inspiration to people who are younger so they don't go and shoot up the other kids in their school? What can I do?
When we were younger, Rich, when we were younger, you know how we took out our anger? You know, my boxing coach, Dave Gorvin, he used to box me years ago. And I don't know if you're familiar with the guy. Good, nice guy.
I am.
Yeah. He used to box with me. He's like, you know what? You have any problem outside of this ring, you get him down to this ring and you fight him one-on-one in the ring. And that's how you get your indifferences out. And you know what? You shake hands at the end of the day because you know what? You're able to fight that fight and stand up at the end of the day, Rich.
You have more respect for each other because you were able to kind of come to some sort of agreement before even the fight because you decided to go down and do it in a place that was safe. Thank you so much for your call.
Thank you, sir.
Have a great day. Somebody on Facebook Live says, I think it has to do with our disconnection to neighbors. Long ago, neighbors with discipline, neighbors would look out for each other, and now it's don't tell me how to raise my kid. And our neighbors are our competition, our enemies. Children at a young age should should learn. There we go. Should learn to settle disputes face to face. And don't mind me, I'm just trying to kind of read through kind of some of the spelling errors, and I apologize to the person for not reading your thoughts the way that you probably wanted them portrayed. But I think you're right. I think neighbors should be more involved in the upbringing of a child because what's the saying? It takes a village to raise a child. I agree with that statement wholeheartedly. But again, before we go to the break, I just want to make this one additional statement, and that is you should be thinking about what you can do yourself to make society better around you. Because really, pretty much down to a person, you could point to the reason why they decided to become an extremist, whether it's a school shooting, a gang member, like we had potentially that gang violence on South Main Street in Fall River, Massachusetts, whether they decide to fly a plane into a building. At some point in time, society failed them. They felt like they were an outcast of society, and they had to find other people who felt the same way they did. Or they had to resort to the extreme option of killing other people. So what can we do? What can every single one of you who are listening today, what can every single one of you who are watching on the J&J Jewelers Facebook live cam do today to make society better around you tomorrow? Today, we're in our last segment, so I'm going to let you, the callers, drive the show, 508-673-1480, to join the conversation, because we are talking about extremism, especially when it comes to school shootings. What was the cause of this, and what can we do to make it better? You're live on the legendary 1480 WSAR. What say you?
Yeah, good morning. Good show today, really. I'm listening, and, everybody that's calling in, everyone has valid points. There's no doubt about it.
And that's exactly right.
And the thing is, it's a combination of all of it. It's a combination of society, of where we're at today with the families, okay, morals and values. Okay, this is the point we've reached in our lives, in our history. It starts from the top down. Look at our government, where it's at. There's so much mistrust in our government. We're divided. It's all of that. We can say it's the guns. We can say it's the mental health. We can say it's the social media. We can say and try to pinpoint one. It's all of it. It's all of it combined.
I think you're right. And there's a couple of things that you said. You think that it's all of this stuff combined and we need to look at all of it as a whole. And the second thing is you said that everybody made great points today, and I think you're right on both points.
Well, it's just something that we got to get our government back in shape again. We're falling apart in this country, okay? And we got to get the strength and the truth. We look at our FBI. We don't trust them now. We don't trust our news media, where we get our information from. So it's a free-for-all. And somehow we don't pull this together from the top, okay, and come down with programs and the family that has to work and is trying to make ends meet and it's just for their needs. Okay, they're coming home. They're working extra hours. The children are left astray. They're coming home without the parent being there. They're making their own breakfast or supper. Going to school unprepared. It's all of that.
Thank you so much for your call. Have a great day, and thank you so much for your unbiased opinion, because that's what it comes across as. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Right.
You're live on the legendary 1480 WSAR. What say you?
Hey, Rich, how's it going?
It's going great. How are you doing today?
Good. Hey, we're in the process of getting a new school. I wonder how voters would feel about having metal detectors in schools.
You know, it's funny because in Fall River, Massachusetts, you're right. They're in the process of trying to get a new Durfee High School. That being said, do metal detectors help with something like this? And this is the scary part about it. If you are, regardless if you're in Idaho, if you're in Massachusetts, if you're in Virginia, this could happen in your schools. This could happen in your backyard. So how do we prevent something like this happening?
One more thing. I ran for school committee. And one of the things on my platform was metal detectors.
Right.
And I caught a lot of heat from other school committee people. They just didn't, not in Fall River with their attitude.
It's funny because when you ask that question, do metal detectors first actually work? And second, does it create more fear than it actually creates more help? So it's a valid debate, and I think it's a conversation that we should have at some point in time. And I think that ultimately, when we talk about how to prevent things like this from happening, I've said it multiple times on the air today, I think we have to look at the society around us, and we have to say, what can we do to make people not feel like outcasts? Because
you got a president that was during the election. He told, I'll pay for your lawyer if you knock the guy out, stuff like that. That's not cool.
Well, and it's funny because saying that you're going to knock somebody out, they're still not an outcast yet. It's when somebody feels so ostracized that they feel that they have no other resort because society has removed them from society. They have no other resort than kill the people around them so they feel like they're empowered again. And they do that multiple ways. It's not just school shootings. It's extremism. People blow themselves up in the name of something that makes more sense to them than the society that they're currently in.
Well, like I said, we got a new school. It's coming. There's no doubt about it. And maybe they should think about it. It's just an idea.
And I think it's a fair idea. It's a fair question, and we should be having these discussions all over this country because you bring up a good point. And
School committee should be talking about it. They should all be talking about it.
And the thing is as opposed to talking about opinions, we do that here on this show. But a lot of the opinions that come across here on Brain Drain are based on fact. So as long as we have a conversation based on actual factual evidence, we shouldn't be having the conversation. And you see that in government all the way up to the top. The reason why they're not focusing on how we change society, how we make school better for kids, how we make it less likely that people are going to commit school shootings is because people operate on opinions as opposed to facts. And that is scary because those are the people that we elect. We're getting close to the end of the show.
Okay,
I
enjoy your show immensely.
Thank you so much.
Keep it up.
You got it. Have a great day. And, we've been talking about this for the past 2 hours. I think it's important that, and I just made that point, that we start focusing on the facts that help us change our society as opposed to the ideas that we have just because we feel that we weren't in the situation. We need to go away from this egocentrism, which is a word that you're using right now at the Swansea Ambulance Corps, and we need to start focusing on how to make society better as a whole, what we can do, what you can do to make society better.